protagonist, Jack was on the lookout using his binoculars. Speaking into his walkie-talkie, he identified himself as Bomber and called for headquarters to respond. Moments later, headquarters answered and asked what the problem was. Jack reported that he had successfully retrieved the chip. However, it appeared that the enemy had prepared quite the welcoming party for him. Because of that, he requested immediate backup. Headquarters quickly shut the idea down. They informed Bomber that no backup would be coming and suggested that he find a way out on his own. In response, Jack let out a stiff laugh. He questioned whether that was really how they intended to treat him. Irritated by their response, he warned that they would be in serious trouble once he made it back. At the same time, he thought to himself that they should not assume they could treat him like that without consequences. He silently vowed that he would make them pay for it. Although he was completely alone, Jack had prepared quite a spectacle. He patiently waited for the pursuing vehicles to move a little closer to the explosives he had planted. Then, at the perfect moment, the bombs detonated. One vehicle exploded after another, sending wreckage scattering in every direction. Watching the destruction unfold, Jack laughed. He joked that they should have seen how they flew through the air. According to him, they were proving to be quite entertaining. Later on, a group of soldiers entered the building where Jack was hiding. Seeing them arrive, Jack wondered what they would think of the present he had prepared for them. Meanwhile, the soldiers spotted his position and shouted that he was above them. As they advanced, one of the soldiers accidentally caught a wire. The moment he tripped it, a bomb exploded among them. Confused, one soldier demanded to know what was happening. Another immediately recognized the situation. He explained that they were dealing with the bomber and warned everyone to watch out for traps. Soon afterward, Jack put on a gas mask and finally revealed himself. He tossed a tear gas canister onto the floor and announced that the party was only just beginning. Within seconds, thick smoke filled the room. Some soldiers began coughing violently, while others struggled as the gas irritated their eyes. Taking advantage of the confusion, Jack sprinted away while gunfire erupted around him. Not long afterward, Jack managed to get behind one of the soldiers. He pressed the barrel of his gun against the man's head. Unable to see his attacker, the soldier nervously asked where Jack was. Jack simply replied, "Here," before pulling the trigger. Immediately afterward, he dashed toward the exit. The surviving soldiers quickly recognized him as the infamous bomber. One soldier shouted that they could not allow Jack to escape. He ordered the others to pursue him at once and reminded them that retrieving the chip was their top priority, no matter the cost. As the chase continued, one of the pursuing soldiers suddenly exploded without warning. Realizing what had happened, another soldier identified the cause immediately. It was a landmine. Afterward, Jack successfully escaped in a van. As he drove away from the scene, he smirked and bid farewell to his pursuers. He mockingly told them that if they wanted to take his life, they should try bringing a few hundred more men next time. Sometime later, Jack stopped at a gas station. He pulled out a beer, opened it, and took a drink. While relaxing for a moment, he realized that the van had become far too noticeable. Thinking it over, he decided that hitchhiking might be a better option. However, before he could make any plans, something unusual happened. A bright circular light suddenly appeared beneath his feet. The strange phenomenon immediately caught his attention. Unsure of what was happening, Jack tried to move, but his body refused to respond. Then, in a single instant, he vanished from the spot where he had been standing. Moments later, Jack found himself inside a grand castle. Looking up, he saw armored knights standing nearby. Alongside them were several nobles dressed in elegant attire. Then, as he looked ahead, he noticed something even stranger. There were other people gathered there as well. They appeared to be from his own world. At the far end of the room sat a king upon a magnificent throne. Naturally, Jack was completely confused by the situation. Soon afterward, a man stepped forward and addressed the group. He welcomed the people from another world and introduced himself as Prime Minister Vilash. He stated that it was a pleasure to have them there. Vilash then informed the summoned individuals that they were no longer in the world they once knew. According to him, they had been brought to an entirely different world. He explained that they had been summoned as a trump card in an ongoing conflict against neighboring nations. Upon hearing that, one of the summoned individuals asked if he was saying that they had truly been summoned to another world. Vilash responded with a smile. He remarked that the young man was quite clever and confirmed that his understanding was correct. He then continued by declaring that, now that they had arrived in this world, they would be regarded as great heroes. Vilash sincerely hoped that they would become the swords that would protect and strengthen the kingdom. Meanwhile, Jack processed everything he had just heard. A different world. The entire situation sounded so ridiculous that he could not help but wonder whether this was simply another elaborate prank. Before long, Vilash announced that he would like to verify everyone's status immediately. At that moment, a status screen appeared beside Jack. It displayed information such as his name, level, rank, karma, and skills. As he examined the screen, Jack casually remarked that it seemed anything was possible in this world. His attention soon shifted toward one particular skill. Translation B. After a brief moment of thought, he guessed that the skill was allowing everyone to communicate despite coming from different worlds. It would explain why he could understand the Japanese students who had been summoned alongside him. His thoughts then moved to another skill. Bomb making EX++. The skill felt important somehow. Even so, Jack had no idea what it actually did. Still, he could not help but think that this world seemed to appreciate the fact that he was a mass-murdering bomber. As far as he was concerned, that could work in his favor. Meanwhile, when Vilash examined Jack's status screen, his expression immediately changed. He stared at it in disbelief. Vilash admitted that he had never expected someone to possess an EX rank skill. What surprised him even more was the extraordinary EX++ rating. According to him, he had never witnessed anything like it before. However, there was something that concerned him even more. Turning toward one of the nearby knights, Vilash instructed him to retrieve a particular item. Without hesitation, the knight acknowledged the order and departed at once. A short while later, Vilash handed something to Jack. When Jack looked at the materials, he immediately recognized them as ingredients used for bomb making. Seeing his reaction, Vilash expressed satisfaction that Jack had identified them so quickly. He then explained that he wanted to witness the capabilities of Jack's EX rank skill firsthand. Jack agreed and took a seat. Without wasting any time, he began the crafting process. Sometime later, he finished his work. The result was a gunpowder explosive bomb. Its status displayed a rank of F and a power rating of 5. As he examined it, Jack realized that he could somehow read the bomb's attributes and characteristics as well. Vilash picked up the gunpowder bomb and inspected it carefully. After looking it over, he questioned whether there was any difference at all. No matter how he looked at it, it appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary bomb. Vilash then summarized his conclusion. According to him, Jack's skill merely guaranteed a successful bomb-making process. Quietly, Jack considered that assessment. To him, that actually sounded fairly useful. Unfortunately, Vilash felt otherwise. Suddenly raising his voice, he declared that Jack's work was complete trash. He argued that anyone could learn bomb-making through practice, even without possessing the bomb-making skill. In his opinion, the skill's enhancements were meaningless, making it a completely hopeless ability. Vilash then turned toward the king and asked for his opinion. He pointed out that Jack was the only useless individual among all the summoned heroes. Not only was he level 1, but he also possessed no additional skills worth mentioning. The moment the other summoned individuals heard about Jack's level and abilities, many of them began chuckling among themselves. Before long, several openly mocked him. The king listened to everything before giving his judgment. He stated that a level 1 individual was not even worth considering as a foot soldier. With that, he ordered the guards to take Jack away. As the guards approached, Jack instinctively reached behind himself to grab something. Then he suddenly remembered that his bag had been left behind at the gas station. Realizing he had no immediate options, he gave up resisting. He casually told the guards to do whatever they wanted since they clearly had the advantage in numbers. At that point, Vilash suggested another possibility. If Jack truly was that useless, he could simply be sold at a slave market. Vilash admitted that he did not believe Jack would fetch much value anyway. Hearing that, Jack scoffed. He argued that selling him would be a waste. Then, with complete confidence, he claimed that plenty of people would be willing to pay a significant amount to hire him. The remark immediately irritated Vilash. Without warning, he slapped Jack across the face. Jack barely reacted. Brushing it off, he warned Vilash not to assume he could simply walk all over him. Leaning closer with an intimidating glare, Jack remarked that he might look harmless, but he was more than capable of folding Vilash in half. Vilash responded coldly. He reminded Jack of his current position and circumstances. Then he declared that it was time to teach him a lesson. Moments later, the guards forced Jack to the ground and began beating him. As the punishment continued, Jack endured the assault in silence. In his mind, he reminded himself that he simply needed to withstand it. Acting recklessly now would only make matters worse. At the moment, patience was the most important virtue he could possess. Eventually, the beating came to an end. Vilash looked down at him and asked whether he had finally learned his lesson. He questioned if some sense had finally been beaten into him. Then he issued another warning. If Jack continued behaving that way, they would seriously consider sentencing him to death. Throughout the entire ordeal, the other summoned individuals merely stood by and watched. None of them intervened. Instead, many simply looked down on Jack as the guards pinned him to the floor. In return, Jack glared back at every single one of them. Then, without warning, everything changed. Jack suddenly broke free from the guards restraining him. Before anyone could react, he charged straight toward Vilash. A moment later, his fist slammed directly into the Prime Minister's face. Vilash immediately collapsed back in pain. Without saying a single word, Jack pressed the gun against Velash's head and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed throughout the chamber. Then he fired again. And again. Several more shots followed in quick succession. The entire group of summoned heroes stood frozen in shock. None of them had expected the situation to escalate so suddenly. Jack glanced down at Velash's lifeless body. Then he reminded him of the warning he had given earlier. According to Jack, he had already told him what would happen. Velash should have kept his head down. Immediately afterward, guards rushed in and surrounded him from all sides. Weapons were drawn. The moment they prepared to fire, Jack grabbed one of the nearby guards and pulled him in front of himself. The guards opened fire without hesitation. Using the unfortunate soldier as cover, Jack shielded himself from the barrage. Once the shooting stopped, Jack looked at the remaining guards and mocked them. He remarked that they certainly did not seem to care much about their comrade. After all, there was barely any blood left in the man's body. With that, he dropped the corpse onto the floor. One of the guards became furious and shouted insults at him, calling him nothing more than a level 1 loser. In response, Jack drew his dagger. Then he rushed forward. Within moments, he cut down one soldier after another. The guards struggled to react as he moved through them at an alarming pace. Watching the battle unfold, one soldier observed that Jack was incredibly fast. Jack casually replied that this was merely the strength of someone at level 1. Meanwhile, the king finally raised his voice and demanded to know exactly who Jack was. Instead of answering directly, Jack tossed an object toward the throne. He told the king to consider it a gift. The king caught it and looked down in confusion. It was a grenade. Before the king could react, Jack finally introduced himself. He claimed that his business card was worth $1 million for hire. His title was simple: Bomber Mercenary. The next second, the grenade detonated directly in front of the throne. As chaos erupted once more, Jack used the opportunity to escape. He fired a grappling hook and launched himself away from the castle. After landing safely on the ground outside, he laughed to himself. Escaping a castle with a grappling hook felt exactly like something out of a spy movie. Soon afterward, he overheard guards relaying new orders. The command had come directly from His Majesty. The otherworldly bomber was to be executed on sight. No matter the cost, he was not allowed to escape. Hearing that, Jack found himself genuinely surprised. In his mind, he wondered how the king had survived the explosion. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Even he admitted that perhaps he had gotten a little carried away. Still, the damage had already been done. As he moved through the city, Jack took a moment to observe his surroundings. He saw both automobiles and horse-drawn carriages traveling the streets side by side. The sight perfectly captured how absurd this world was. Under different circumstances, he would have enjoyed exploring the place. Instead, he continued running. For now, complaints could wait. His first priority was securing a vehicle. Escaping the city afterward should be relatively easy. Thankfully, he still had some equipment on him. He expected to encounter heavily armed guards eventually. If necessary, he could always take their weapons. Then suddenly he stopped. A thought crossed his mind. Why was he even trying to escape? They had summoned him into this world. Then they had immediately treated him like garbage. Why should he be the one running away? His thoughts shifted to the other summoned heroes who had stood there watching. The same people who had laughed at him and looked down on him. At that moment, Jack reached a conclusion. There were lines that should never be crossed. And in his eyes, they had already crossed them. Turning back toward the castle, he decided that his revenge was not finished yet. Some time later, Jack infiltrated the castle once again. As he moved through the halls, he dealt with the guards standing in his way. At the same time, he considered where the best location for a bomb might be. Then something caught his attention overhead. Looking upward, he noticed a massive structure suspended above. Curious, he asked an elf woman what it was. The elf explained that it was the city's core. According to her, it was a magical device responsible for controlling the various magical systems operating throughout the imperial capital. In simple terms, it was the heart of the city. Hearing that description, Jack focused on one particular word. A heart. Core. Then he asked the obvious question. Could it be blown up? The elf hesitated before answering. Technically, yes. However, she immediately emphasized that it was not something anyone should attempt. Recreating such a delicate artifact would be extremely difficult. In the worst-case scenario, the destruction could trigger a catastrophe capable of devastating the entire empire. Jack listened carefully. Then he admitted that the only part he truly heard was the phrase, "Technically, you can." The elf immediately begged him not to do anything so reckless. To her, the very idea was outrageous. Meanwhile, Jack recalled something Velash had said earlier. His skill only guaranteed the success rate of bomb making. With that thought in mind, he decided to test a theory. Throwing an object toward the city's core, he remarked that it was worth a try. Almost immediately, the core began behaving strangely. The elf stared in disbelief. She could not understand how such a thing was even possible. At that point, Jack noticed that she was trying to leave. He called out to her and jokingly asked where she thought she was going. After everything that had happened, he suggested that they were practically partners in crime. The elf quickly argued otherwise. She insisted that she had already helped him enough and pleaded for him to spare her. All she wanted was to leave. Jack considered her words for a moment. Then he admitted that she had indeed helped him. He even agreed that she had been useful. A second later, without any hesitation, he raised his weapon and shot her. The elf collapsed instantly. Jack lowered the gun and turned his attention back toward the city core. Jack looked around and said it was time to set up a picnic spot with a good view. Nearby, two men were having a conversation. One of them mentioned a strange magical reaction and wondered what was happening. The other decided to go take a look. However, before he could do anything, Jack suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He grabbed the man's face and slammed it against the wall. Then he casually turned to the other man and asked if he had a car. Jack added that it would be great if he could borrow it for a minute. Later, far away from the city, Jack arrived at a location overlooking the entire area. He took a moment to observe the scenery. After examining the surroundings, he concluded that it was probably the perfect spot. Then he complained that all those pricks kept messing with him. After that, he pressed the detonator. Instantly, the city's core exploded. A massive blast engulfed the entire area. Once the smoke finally cleared, the result became obvious. The entire city had been completely wiped out by the explosion. Jack burst into laughter. He said the whole thing was amazing. In fact, he admitted that he couldn't stop laughing. Back in the present, Jack turned to Alice and explained that was the entire story. He said that was the reason he wanted to find a way back to his own world. According to him, he had heard rumors about an alchemist who might know something useful. If Alice knew anything, that would be a huge help. With that, Jack asked what she thought. Alice stared at him and asked if he had really blown up the imperial capital. Jack casually confirmed it. As usual, Alice remained completely unbothered. She simply apologized and said she wasn't in the mood for jokes. Jack replied that neither was he. Then he added that it would probably become major news soon enough. Alice pointed out that even with the assistance of the Empire's mages, turning the city's core into a bomb was completely ridiculous. Furthermore, she couldn't sense any mana coming from him. That led her to ask whether he was even a magic user. Jack admitted that he probably wasn't. He explained that he couldn't even create a simple fireball. However, he mentioned that he possessed something else that was rather special. Then he pulled up his status screen. Alice asked if she could take a look. Jack told her to be his guest. As she examined the screen, one particular skill immediately caught her attention. Bomb making EX++. To her, it was astonishing proof that Jack had not been lying. Alice explained that within the world's ranking system, reaching rank A already meant someone was a master. An EX rank, meanwhile, was the kind of thing that only existed in children's stories. Yet Jack's skill went even further. It had 2+ signs attached to it. According to Alice, this was a power beyond mankind's understanding. A power capable of turning the unimaginable into reality. Jack commented that it sounded pretty cool. In fact, he admitted that hearing that made him feel somewhat proud. Alice responded by pointing out that he was acting as though it were somebody else's problem despite it being his own power. Jack argued that it was someone else's problem. After all, nobody had asked him whether he wanted that power before giving it to him. Even so, he admitted that he was starting to enjoy its effects quite a bit. Alice then brought up the numerical values displayed throughout Jack's status screen. Jack immediately replied that he had been curious about those himself. Several hours earlier, shortly after the city's destruction, the car Jack had stolen suddenly overheated. Frustrated, he wondered what he was supposed to do now. He reflected that perhaps he should have asked for a way home before blowing everyone up. Then he admitted that he still hadn't gotten rid of his bad habit of wanting to commit mass murder whenever someone provoked him. A moment later, another realization struck him. He had forgotten to grab cigarettes. Jack reasoned that if the people of this world had been capable of summoning him, then they should also be capable of sending him back. Besides, this world was already strange enough. Status screens randomly appeared out of nowhere, so almost anything seemed possible. Then something unexpected happened. Jack noticed that his level had skyrocketed from level 1 all the way to level 385. Confused, he questioned whether he hadn't started at level 1 when he first arrived. He also discovered that his class had changed to bomber. On top of that, his karma had dropped to -600. The explanation seemed obvious. He had blown up an entire city and received an absurd amount of experience points as a result. As far as he could tell, that was literally the only possible reason. Jack then reflected on video games from his old world. From what he remembered, most games capped levels at 99. Then again, newer games didn't really do that anymore. Suddenly, Jack realized something. If his level had increased that much, then perhaps his body had changed as well. Curious, he decided to test the theory. He immediately broke into a run. The moment he accelerated, shock spread across his face. His speed was far beyond anything he had ever experienced. In fact, he nearly slammed straight into a rock. Fortunately, he managed to stop himself at the last second. Even so, the force created several cracks across the stone. Afterward, he picked up some broken chunks from the rock. The next thing he discovered left him even more stunned. With almost no effort at all, he crushed the stone in his bare hand. To him, it felt no harder than crushing a cracker. At that moment, everything became clear. Just as he had suspected, leveling up didn't simply increase numbers on a screen. It directly enhanced his physical abilities as well. Filled with excitement, Jack declared that this was perfect. He joked that someone should call Superman because a new superhero had arrived in town. Then another thought crossed his mind. If his physical abilities had increased this much, perhaps he could fly as well. Naturally, he decided to test it. A few moments later, he learned the answer. Flying was definitely not part of his skill set. Even so, he figured he could probably shatter every Olympic high jump record without breaking a sweat. Satisfied with that conclusion, Jack decided on his next course of action. He said that with abilities like these, he would simply run around until he found a town. Then, with a grin, he added that maybe he would even get himself a superhero suit before Christmas. Back in the present, Alice stared at the status screen and declared the whole thing ridiculous. She continued examining every detail. After a thorough inspection, she concluded that there were no signs of status forgery. Jack seemed relieved to hear that. He remarked that it was good news because he had already been wondering what he would do if someone questioned him again. Alice immediately picked up on that statement. She asked what he meant by, again. Jack responded by asking whether she knew about the guards stationed at town gates. His thoughts drifted back to an earlier encounter. While checking his status screen near the entrance of a town, one of the guards noticed his karma value. -600. The guard commented that Jack was breaking all the wrong records. Then he noticed something else. Level 385. That immediately raised suspicion. The guard insisted that such a level had to be fake. Other guards quickly joined the discussion. Some claimed there was no way a person could reach that level. Others argued that regardless of whether it was real or not, Jack was clearly dangerous. Back in the present, Jack explained the situation to Alice. According to him, he was neither a fraud nor a dangerous individual. However, when a man found himself cornered after receiving such a warm welcome, things could become complicated. Alice then asked the obvious question. How exactly had he gotten past the guards? For a brief moment, Jack's eyes widened. Then he calmly answered that they had simply enjoyed a friendly conversation. The reality, however, had been very different. Jack had pulled out his gun, shot the guards, and followed up by throwing grenades at them. Still maintaining his innocent expression, Jack told Alice that he had merely given the guards something precious in exchange for passage. According to him, they had happily let him through afterward. Alice accepted the explanation without question. Soon afterward, she asked another question. Although the numbers on his status screen were abnormal, they did not appear to be false. So where had he gone after entering town? Jack explained that while searching for a way home, several kind local residents had offered to help him. Once again, the truth told a completely different story. In reality, Jack had beaten those helpful locals senseless. Afterward, he pointed a gun at one of them and demanded answers. Terrified, the battered man eventually revealed what he knew. If Jack wanted information about returning home, he should seek out the witch. According to him, she might possess some form of space magic. Unfortunately, he himself knew nothing about it. The word immediately caught Jack's attention. Witch. The local man quickly elaborated. The witch was actually an alchemist who lived in town. She earned a living by selling homemade potions. However, rumors claimed that she possessed immense power. Over the years, several idiots had attempted to rob her house. None of them had ever returned. Because of that, nobody dared to mess with her anymore. Back in the present, Jack commented that the description sounded strange. He asked whether witches were not supposed to be evil and ugly old hags. Alice answered with a simple yes. Then she shifted the conversation elsewhere. She admitted that she was quite curious about Jack's skills. However, it was already time for supper. If he did not mind, she asked whether he would like to join her for a meal. Jack immediately accepted. Hell yes. He thanked her and admitted there was no way he could turn down an offer like that. Alice nodded and said she would prepare everything. Then she clapped her hands. Without warning, a group of golems suddenly appeared behind Jack. Each one carried trays of food as they silently moved into position. Jack nearly jumped out of his seat. He asked what exactly those things were. Alice calmly explained that they were golems. She had created them herself, and they faithfully followed her orders. Jack looked at the creatures in amazement. So this was alchemy. Then another thought occurred to him. If they followed commands and performed tasks automatically, weren't they basically robots? Alice tilted her head in confusion. She admitted that she had absolutely no idea what a robot was supposed to be. However, she added that she loved using these children as her personal servants. Alice announced that the meal was ready and invited Jack to eat. As the dishes were placed before him, Jack carefully examined the food. In his mind, he admitted that he had absolutely no idea what any of it was made from. Even so, it looked surprisingly similar to food from his own world. The aroma was wonderful, and at the very least, it probably wasn't poisoned. As he sat there, another thought crossed his mind. He had been invited into someone's home and was now being served dinner. Was she interested in him? Then again, this was supposedly the witch's cottage of no return. That wasn't exactly the kind of title a person should ignore. In the end, he decided not to worry about it. If she tried anything funny, he would simply beat her up. The moment Jack took his first bite, his doubts disappeared. The food was incredible. Sure, he thought it could use a little more salt. Even so, it was undeniably delicious. As they ate, Alice returned to the topic of sending Jack home. She explained that repatriation magic was not impossible. However, it was extremely difficult. Before anything else, they would need to understand the spell's structure and procedure. That meant acquiring proper research equipment, gathering materials, and conducting extensive studies. On top of that, such a project would require support from a large organization. As an example, she mentioned a country. While listening, Jack quietly reflected on everything he had learned during his journey. Essentially, it was the same conclusion he had already reached. If he wanted to return home, he would need access to summoning magic or repatriation magic. Both belonged to the category of spatial magic, one of the most difficult forms of magic to use. Furthermore, they were considered great magic. The procedures, formulas, and magical arrays involved were carefully guarded secrets controlled by powerful nations. There was simply no realistic way for an individual to access them alone. Still, one detail stood out. Alice had not said it was impossible. She had said it was difficult. That meant there was still a chance. Jack began considering his options. If all he needed were resources, equipment, and support, perhaps he could work as a mercenary for some random country. However, another problem immediately surfaced. Even if a nation hired him, could he really trust everything to go according to plan? More importantly, his status now identified him as a bomber. With status boards visible to everyone, hiding his identity was practically impossible. Besides, Jack had never liked being controlled by governments. At this point, he knew exactly what his trump card was. He could destroy a city's core. He had already done it once. And if every country possessed a similar core, then the temptation would become increasingly difficult to resist. After all, a bomber could only ignore that kind of opportunity for so long. Noticing his troubled expression, Alice asked what was bothering him. She wondered whether he disliked the idea of working under a country. Jack admitted that it depended on the circumstances. Before the conversation could continue, an unfamiliar sound echoed from outside. Jack immediately looked up and asked what that was. Alice glanced toward the window. After observing for a moment, she concluded that something had likely triggered the spell installed on the front gate. According to her, the barrier had been designed specifically to repel intruders. Then she casually pointed out that Jack had managed to walk through it without any issues. That statement immediately reminded Jack of something. When he had entered the property earlier, he vaguely remembered feeling something similar to static electricity as he opened the gate. Now that he thought about it, it had actually hurt quite a bit. Alice explained that she had designed the spell to be strong enough to knock out most people. However, against individuals with sufficiently high levels, its effects became less reliable. She then noted that the person outside seemed perfectly fine as well. Moments later, the visitor opened the gate and entered the property. Alice narrowed her eyes as she examined him. The man's clothing appeared unusual and unlike anything she normally saw. Curious, she asked Jack whether the newcomer was a friend of his. Jack immediately replied by asking whether he looked like the kind of person who had friends in this world. Then he took a closer look. The instant he recognized the man's face, his expression changed. It was one of the summoned heroes. More specifically, it was one of the people who had looked down on him from the very beginning. Jack admitted that it was certainly a familiar face. At the same time, he couldn't help wondering how the hell the guy had survived the destruction of the imperial capital. The moment the man spotted him, rage exploded across his face. He shouted that he had finally found him. Then he demanded that Jack get down there immediately. After hearing that, Jack stood up from his seat. He politely excused himself from the table and explained that he suddenly had something he needed to take care of. Before Jack stepped outside, Alice stopped him. She told him to be careful. Jack looked back at her, slightly surprised by the warning. Alice explained that the man outside might be dangerous. From what she could sense, he was furious. More than that, he seemed to be carrying an immense hatred specifically directed at Jack. Jack nodded. He told her he would be careful. Then he reminded her that he still had a few questions he wanted answered, so she shouldn't disappear while he was gone. For a moment, Alice hesitated. Then she quietly assured him that she would stay. As Jack prepared his weapons, a thought crossed his mind. This definitely didn't seem like it was going to be a friendly conversation. Unfortunately, he also couldn't rely too heavily on the ammunition he had left. His remaining rounds were limited, and that was becoming a bigger problem with every fight. A short while later, Jack stepped outside and approached the visitor. He casually greeted the man. The response was immediate. The man drew his sword. Jack glanced at the weapon before looking back at him. He commented that the man seemed surprisingly healthy. Honestly, Jack had assumed he had been reduced to ashes along with everyone else. The man's expression twisted with anger. He declared that he had been searching for Jack ever since the disaster. In fact, he couldn't believe he had found him in the very first town he visited. Then he got straight to the point. Jack was the one who destroyed the imperial capital. Wasn't he? Jack answered without the slightest hesitation. According to Jack, the people there had been pulling ridiculous nonsense. They got exactly what was coming to them. The man's grip tightened around his sword. He said he knew it. Those actions were pure evil. While listening, Jack casually approached the gate. Before opening it completely, he checked whether the barrier still carried that irritating static shock. Meanwhile, the man continued. Did Jack even realize how many people had died because of what he had done? Jack immediately answered no. As far as he was concerned, the numbers had nothing to do with him. The man's voice rose even higher. Didn't he feel even a little remorse? Jack simply shrugged. He replied that if he understood the concept of remorse, nobody would be calling him a bomber. The title wasn't something new. Even back in his previous world, Jack had been known as the bomber. People feared him. Over the years, he had lost track of how many people had died because of his explosives. The number had become meaningless long ago. From Jack's perspective, if he stopped to feel guilty every time one of his bombs went off, there would have been no reason for him to become a mercenary in the first place. Then he shifted the conversation. There was something he genuinely wanted to know. How was this guy still alive? Jack pointed out that the explosion had erased the city in an instant. Even now, he found it hard to believe that the man was standing there completely intact. The man finally provided an explanation. According to him, his survival was thanks to the special skill he had received. Furthermore, he wasn't the only one. Every reincarnated individual had survived the catastrophe through their own unique abilities. Then he revealed something even more interesting. Jack wasn't the only person blessed with extraordinary powers in this world. The surviving reincarnated individuals might not be cooperating openly. They might not even like one another. However, the man was certain of one thing. Every single one of them was plotting to bring Jack down. Upon hearing that, Jack's thoughts immediately wandered elsewhere. So those idiots who mocked him back at the summoning ceremony were still alive. Apparently, their ridiculous cheat abilities had saved them. The realization didn't bother him. If anything, it excited him. Jack had always preferred finishing a job completely. Once he selected a target, he wanted them eliminated. If he failed to blow them up, the feeling lingered like an unfinished task. The thought that his targets had somehow survived only made him want to hunt them down even more. A grin slowly spread across his face. He admitted that he might actually lose sleep over how exciting that news sounded. The man's expression darkened even further. Every word out of Jack's mouth seemed to fuel his anger. Jack, meanwhile, looked genuinely curious. He asked why the man would reveal such valuable information in the first place. After all, wasn't he giving away the element of surprise? The man responded immediately. He wasn't telling Jack for strategic reasons. He was telling him because he wanted to plant a seed of despair. Jack needed to understand exactly what awaited him. He needed to live with the knowledge that powerful enemies were hunting him. Most importantly, he needed to regret everything he had done. Then the man took a step forward. According to him, there was another reason the information didn't matter. After all, Jack was already a dead man. And for someone who was about to die, learning 1 or 2 extra details changed absolutely nothing. Jack smirked as he looked at the man. He admitted that the guy was certainly confident. Then he remarked that perhaps, in another world, he could have forgotten about revenge and managed to live one more day. However, it was far too late for that now. Jack challenged him to come forward. After all, he intended to blow him into pieces. The man's anger immediately intensified. His face twisted with fury as he charged straight toward Jack, sword in hand and ready to strike. While rushing forward, he declared that he would continue fulfilling his duty as the hero of the imperial capital. Then, once everything was over, he would return to his original world and finally live a carefree life. As he advanced, thoughts raced through his mind. Min-Ida believed he had never been the type to get caught in trouble. In his eyes, people who found themselves dragged into problems were pathetic. That was why he always observed everything carefully before acting. By doing so, he had concluded that there were far more failures in the world than people like him who successfully avoided trouble throughout elementary school, high school, and even work. His memories suddenly resurfaced. He recalled the day his boss grabbed him by the collar and demanded to know whether it was true that he had sold company secrets to outside parties. Min-ida remembered calmly admitting that it was true. Then he questioned what the problem was. Out of all his coworkers, he was the only one who never received a raise. To him, that was the truly absurd part. His boss had been horrified. He reminded Min-ida that he had even leaked employees' personal information. Furious, the boss asked whether he had completely lost his mind. Yet Min-ida refused to accept any blame. He insisted that the fault belonged to everyone else. In his mind, his employers had simply failed to recognize his potential. Again and again he cursed them. He shouted internally that he was not wrong. Everything was their fault. Every bit of it. Then came the light. When it appeared beneath him, Min-ida saw it as an answer to his cries. He believed the world had wronged him. The light was proof of that. To him, it represented a second chance. A chance to reclaim his honor. A chance to obtain the life he deserved. But now, because of Jack, everything had changed. As Min-ida closed the distance and prepared to strike, Jack suddenly raised a hand and stopped him. Before the attack could continue, Jack told him to hold up for a second. He said he wanted to hear his name first. Confused, Min-ida demanded to know why that would even matter. Jack casually explained that if he didn't know the man's name, building his grave afterward would be a pain in the ass. The moment he finished speaking, Jack pulled the trigger and fired 3 shots. Min-ida instantly reacted. The incoming bullets halted in midair before changing direction. Under his control, they shot back toward Jack. However, Jack quickly dodged the first bullet. The remaining 2 followed immediately after, but he avoided those as well. Watching the exchange, Jack realized exactly what had happened. Min-ida hadn't merely blocked the bullets. He had reflected them. Intrigued, Jack admitted that the magic was interesting. Then he demanded to know what kind of crazy ability the man possessed. Min-ida proudly revealed his skill. It was called Perfect Reflection A+. According to him, any damage directed toward his body would automatically be reflected back at double the power. He continued boasting. The same skill was the reason he had survived the massive explosion in the imperial capital. No matter what Jack threw at him, it would be useless. As long as he possessed Perfect Reflection A+, he considered himself completely undefeated. Finally, Min-ida looked directly at Jack and agreed to reveal his name. He said Jack might as well know it. After all, when Jack reached Hell, he could warn its residents about the man who sent him there. The man finally revealed his name. He introduced himself as Min-ida Kuji. Then he raised his sword and pointed it directly at Jack. Jack acknowledged the name and casually thanked him for sharing it. Without hesitation, he pulled out a knife and drove it toward Min-ida's neck. Just as expected, the blade never reached its target. The moment it made contact with the invisible barrier, it was instantly deflected and dropped to the ground. Jack immediately switched weapons. He pulled out his gun and fired. Once again, the bullet bounced away upon impact. Min-ida wasted no time counterattacking. He swung his sword at Jack with full force. However, Jack smoothly dodged the strike before launching a kick toward Min-ida's face. The result was no different. The barrier reflected the kick the same way it had reflected every other attack. Seeing no immediate opening, Jack stepped backward and created some distance. He raised his gun once more, aimed at Min-ida, and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Min-ida instantly realized what had occurred. Jack was out of bullets. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Min-ida lunged forward and slashed with his sword. Yet Jack reacted quickly, jumping backward and narrowly avoiding the attack. Min-ida smirked. Surely Jack had noticed by now. No matter what he did, everything was pointless against Perfect Reflection. Every attack would simply be returned. As Min-ida continued boasting, Jack remained completely expressionless. His eyes never left his opponent. Then he asked a seemingly random question. "What level are you, dude?" Min-ida proudly answered. "Level 80. He explained that his level alone granted him physical abilities far beyond those of ordinary people. Jack nodded. Then he casually revealed his own. Level 385. For a moment, Min-ida froze. The number hit him like a brick. His eyes widened as he immediately called Jack a liar. Jack simply shrugged. He told Min-ida that he wasn't messing with him. The reason his level had reached such absurd heights was because he had accumulated an enormous amount of experience points. The confidence on Min-ida's face began to crack. A feeling of unease crawled up his spine. Fear followed shortly after. Still, he desperately tried to suppress it. "So what?" he shouted. "The higher your level is, the better it is for me. That just means I can reflect even more damage back at you." Meanwhile, Jack silently evaluated the situation. To be honest, recklessly attacking Min-ida would be suicidal. Fortunately, Min-ida was a complete amateur when it came to actual combat. Even if their levels were equal, Jack still wouldn't enjoy getting sliced in half by a sword. The problem remained the same. How exactly was he supposed to kill him? Across from him, Min-ida's frustration continued growing. He couldn't understand why Jack refused to give up. According to him, Jack had no path to victory. Running away wouldn't change anything. His defeat was inevitable. All he had to do was accept his judgment. Jack responded with a mocking grin. He asked if they could hurry things along because people were waiting. The comment immediately irritated Mineta. He demanded to know how Jack could still joke around in a situation like this. There was no chance of turning the fight around. None. Jack merely stretched his shoulders and prepared himself. Oh yeah. His tone was calm. Almost amused. Then his expression sharpened. He warned Mineta to never think of himself as unbeatable. Because arrogance only led to one destination. Destruction. The instant he finished speaking, Jack exploded forward. Before Mineta could react, Jack grabbed him by the face and seized control of his entire body. The sudden move completely caught Mineta off guard. Jack asked him how that felt firsthand. Mineta stared at him in confusion, unable to understand what he meant. Then, in a single smooth movement, Jack slipped behind him. His arms wrapped around Mineta's neck. A chokehold. The lock was secured perfectly. Mineta struggled immediately, but Jack had already established control. Calmly, Jack informed him that he was about to put him in a painless chokehold. Then he explained his reasoning. This was how he intended to bypass perfect reflection A+. He didn't need to inflict damage. All he had to do was restrict Mineta's movements with minimal force and keep him pinned down. If no damage was dealt, there would be nothing for the skill to reflect. Realizing the danger, Mineta desperately fought to break free. His hands stretched toward the sword lying nearby. However, Jack tightened his control and couldn't resist making a joke. He told Mineta to consider it a hug from one of his fans. Without loosening his hold, Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small explosive. He casually called it a nice souvenir before forcing it into Mineta's mouth. Then he pulled out a lighter. A spark appeared. The fuse was lit. Before Mineta could react, Jack forced him to swallow it. Calmly, Jack explained that the explosive cracker had come from the castle. Its firepower was incredibly low. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't even leave a dent. Then he brought up perfect reflection. If he remembered correctly, all reflected damage was doubled. The initial explosion might be weak, but with enough reflections and enough doubling, the outcome became obvious. After all, the explosion was occurring inside Mineta's body. There was nowhere for the energy to escape. Instead, it would continue bouncing back and forth endlessly. Jack kept one hand firmly over Mineta's mouth. Then he told him they would find out exactly how long he could endure it. At that moment, fear finally appeared on Mineta's face. Pure terror spread through his expression. He struggled desperately, but Jack's hold remained unbreakable. Moments later, the first muffled explosion occurred. Jack remarked that it was annoying. The blast had already moved into Mineta's stomach. Then another explosion followed. And another. As the chain reaction continued, Jack casually asked whether Mineta wanted to be saved. According to Jack, there was only one condition. Mineta would need to forgive him. More importantly, he would need to treat Jack as a friend. In the distance, nearby onlookers heard the strange sounds. Confused, they began wondering what was causing the repeated noises. Meanwhile, Jack continued covering Mineta's mouth. Then, after a moment, he suddenly stood up. Addressing Mineta as though speaking to an old companion, Jack announced that their newly established friendship deserved a celebration. So they would play ball. There was only one catch. Mineta would be the ball. Jack encouraged him to enjoy every second of it. Then he launched Mineta high into the air. A moment later, a violent explosion erupted overhead. The blast echoed across the area. When it was over, fragments scattered through the sky as debris rained downward. Below, Jack stood with his arms raised as if celebrating a spectacular performance. Laughing to himself, he praised the shot. According to him, it was an astonishing trick shot that had made the ball disappear entirely. What a shame, he added. A performance like that could only be enjoyed once. The nearby spectators were horrified. The scene left them frozen for only a second before panic took over. One by one, they turned and ran. Jack watched them leave in confusion. He complained about what a weird crowd they were. They had shown up to watch, yet somehow they were the ones causing a scene. According to Jack, they should have shown a little decency. Later, back inside Alice's house, Jack finally returned. He apologized for keeping her waiting. Alice welcomed him back immediately. However, she quickly noticed the condition he was in. He looked injured. Concerned, she asked whether he was all right. Jack let out a small laugh. He told her not to worry. All he needed was a little drink and some sleep. After that, he would be perfectly fine. Alice apologized. Unfortunately, there was no alcohol in the house. The news visibly disappointed Jack. Still, he brushed it off and said it wasn't a problem. If necessary, he would simply go find some himself. Alice nodded in understanding. Then she reminded him of one thing. Before stepping any farther into the house, he needed to wash all that blood off first. Later, Jack took a shower. Once he was finished, Alice told him to make himself at home. Jack thanked her for her hospitality. Still, he admitted that he did not know if he had the luxury of relaxing and enjoying a bath under the current circumstances. Then he asked if everything was truly fine after what had happened. The people of the town avoided speaking about the witch and did everything they could to stay out of her bad graces. What had occurred earlier had only reinforced their fears. In response, Alice welcomed him to stay in her humble mansion if he had nowhere else to go. To Jack, the offer sounded far better than spending another night sleeping inside an abandoned house in the slums. It was not something he could easily refuse. Even so, he could not shake the feeling that Alice was being unusually kind. Alice the alchemist remained a mystery. The truth behind the rumors surrounding her was still unclear. There was something about the way she carried herself that felt disconnected from the rest of the world. Jack did not believe she was helping him out of pure generosity. If there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that he was not the type of person people naturally liked. There had to be another reason behind her actions. And if that was the case, he intended to find out what it was. A short while later, while still in the bathroom, Jack noticed movement outside. His thoughts immediately drifted to Alice. Surely she would not stoop so low as to ambush him while he was showering, right? He stood up and pulled back the curtain. Instead of finding Alice, he discovered several of her servants carrying his clothes. Instantly, Jack assumed a fighting stance and demanded to know what they were doing. Startled by his reaction, the servants quickly fled the room. Afterward, he examined the neatly folded clothes they had left behind. Only then did he realize they had been washed and dry cleaned. He quietly muttered that Alice was an incredibly attentive woman, a force to be reckoned with. Later, Jack thanked her for removing the blood and mud from his clothing. Alice simply acknowledged his gratitude. As they spoke, Alice noticed that Jack's injuries had already healed. Jack confirmed it. At the same time, he silently realized that even the soreness in his limbs had completely disappeared. It was most likely the result of his increased recovery rate after reaching a higher level. For Jack, it was an incredible improvement. Hearing that, Alice remarked that healing treatment would no longer be necessary. Soon after, she offered to show him the guest room. When they arrived, Alice invited him to use the room however he pleased and encouraged him to get some rest. Jack agreed, noting that the bed looked exceptionally comfortable. Then Alice turned her attention to another matter. She asked what she should call him. Jack replied that either Jack or Aaron was fine, depending on the situation. He told her to choose whichever name she preferred since he did not particularly mind. Alice decided that she would call him Jack. With her usual calm expression, she remarked that he possessed a strong spirit, a trait she found appealing. Jack laughed at the comment. In his experience, most people would simply describe that same quality as being insensitive or arrogant. Alice responded by saying that Jack might not realize it, but he was an exceptionally rare specimen. From the moment she first laid eyes on him, her curiosity had been sparked. That interest was precisely why she had invited him into her mansion. Jack stared at her for a moment before lowering himself dramatically. Then, with a grin, he asked if this was love at first sight. He went on to joke that being a handsome man like himself was truly a burden. Alice, however, remained unfazed. She admitted that she liked people who were mad, people like Jack. To her, there was never anything less than entertaining about gazing into the filth that resided within his soul. Jack remarked that it was not exactly something to be proud of. Still, he decided to take it as a compliment. Then his thoughts drifted back to something Alice had mentioned earlier. She had spoken about the man he had recently killed, the one who harbored immense hatred toward him. Curious, Jack asked if she could actually see emotions like that. Alice explained that she could, but only to a limited extent. She said she was capable of perceiving the hues of emotions and spirits. However, she clarified that her ability was nowhere near the level of mind reading. Jack reflected on the idea of hues and colors representing emotions. Then he commented that it sounded like a very convenient power. Alice simply nodded. Afterward, she remarked that if there was nothing else to discuss, it was getting late. She told him that she would see him tomorrow and wished him a good night's sleep. Jack returned the sentiment and wished her the same. Soon, morning arrived. Jack was still asleep when Alice quietly entered his room. She stood there silently, doing nothing except staring at his face. A moment later, Jack's eyes opened. He sat up and greeted her with a good morning. Alice greeted him back just as calmly. Then she informed him that breakfast was ready and invited him to join her for a meal. As Jack followed her, he found himself thinking, if Alice had ulterior motives or some other agenda, she should have revealed it by now. Jack hated being exploited. On the other hand, when someone treated him well, he genuinely preferred to repay the favor whenever it was within his means. Doing so gave him a sense of satisfaction. While they were dining, Alice asked him how the food was. Jack replied that it was very good. Privately, however, he thought it was far better than that. The meal was genuinely delicious. If there were a restaurant that served food like this, he would undoubtedly become a regular customer. Alice then explained that she had used heavier seasoning this time. Yesterday, she had noticed that he did not seem entirely satisfied with the meal. Jack quietly realized she was right. The previous dinner had been delicious, but it had also been slightly bland. He had never expected her to notice something so subtle. Embarrassed, Jack remarked that he could not believe he had let her see through him like that. Then he apologized. Alice paid little attention to the apology. Instead, she asked what he intended to do from now on. Jack answered without hesitation. First, he planned to return to his own world. However, there was something else he intended to take care of before that. He stated that he was going to murder the people who had been summoned alongside him. After learning that he had failed to finish the job the first time, he became convinced that those individuals were plotting revenge against him. As far as he was concerned, the roots of the problem needed to be cut out before they could grow any further. Alice listened to his declaration and remarked that such a task would probably be difficult. Nevertheless, she said that she would be cheering for him. Then another thought crossed her mind. She asked if she could see more of Jack's skills after breakfast. More specifically, she wanted to learn about his bomb-making abilities. She was curious about how they worked, how they were created, and what kind of results they could produce. Her curiosity, she admitted, was extremely high. Jack agreed without much resistance. He told her to gather the necessary materials, and he would gladly demonstrate everything for her. Alice looked at him with quiet confidence. Then she instructed him to follow her. A short while later, the two of them entered a storage room. Alice explained that this was the place where she brewed her potions. According to her, the room also contained various explosive materials that could be used for experimentation. Meanwhile, Jack slowly looked around the room, carefully observing everything that surrounded him. As Jack looked around the storage room, a thought crossed his mind. Even if he could read the labels on the containers, that did not mean he actually understood what any of them were. To him, the names alone were meaningless without proper explanation. Fortunately, Alice seemed more than willing to provide one. She picked up a bottle filled with a glowing liquid and introduced it first. According to her, it was a substance created from mana. It was an essential component in the production of magical tools and was also used as fuel for magical vehicles. The higher its purity, the more valuable it became. Next, Alice presented another bottle. This one contained processed bodily fluids extracted from magical beasts. She explained that even slight contact with the substance could result in severe burns. Then she moved on to a third container. Inside was a vegetable-based liquid. Alice explained that it was highly flammable and commonly used in the brewing of alcohol. However, she strongly advised against drinking it in its raw form. Hearing that, Jack casually remarked that drinking it sounded like a perfect Friday night plan. Alice ignored the joke and continued her explanation. As she described each substance, along with their properties and practical uses, Jack gradually began identifying possible combinations. Several of the materials immediately struck him as suitable ingredients for explosives. Before long, Alice began outlining a recipe. She instructed him to mix specific ingredients in precise quantities. After that, he was to bottle the mixture, attach a fuse, cool it down until it solidified, and complete the process. Once she finished, Alice commented that the recipe was notoriously difficult to work with. In her opinion, that made it perfect for evaluating Jack's abilities. Jack listened carefully before asking if all she wanted him to do was craft it. Alice confirmed that was the task. However, the moment he examined the formula more closely, his expression changed. A look of confusion spread across his face. Alice immediately noticed. She asked him what was wrong. Jack responded by questioning the mixing ratios. Something about them felt off. Alice quickly denied there being any mistake. She reminded him that she was an alchemist and told him to trust her expertise. According to her, he simply needed to follow the instructions and continue. In that case, he told her not to mind if he did. Then he got to work. Only 5 minutes later, the results were sitting right in front of them. A completed magic bomb. Rank D. Power rating, 1000. Both Alice and Jack stared at the finished product. From Jack's perspective, it was not bad at all. In fact, he thought it performed better than the firecrackers he was accustomed to making. Naturally, it could not compare to something on the level of the city's core, but that was an absurd benchmark to begin with. Comparing ordinary explosives to that monster of an exception would be unfair. Alice carefully picked up one of the bombs. For nearly a full minute, she examined it in complete silence. Then she slowly looked toward Jack. Finally, she spoke. The magic bomb was amazing. Even though it had been created using an improper mixing ratio, Jack had somehow made it work. Jack immediately asked what she meant. Alice revealed the truth. The recipe she had provided was one that nobody had ever successfully followed. Not a single person. Yet despite that, Jack had managed to create not one bomb, but 3. To Alice, the feat was simply impossible. At that point, everything finally clicked for Jack. Now he understood why the recipe had felt wrong from the start. No wonder he had a bad feeling about it. Alice had deliberately handed him a terrible formula. One that was practically guaranteed to fail. The entire exercise had been a test designed to evaluate the true nature of his skill. Jack let out a sigh. Then he asked if she was satisfied now. After all, his ability practically guaranteed successful bomb production regardless of circumstances. As far as he was concerned, that was the end of the demonstration. The skill itself was straightforward. Its applications, however, were unmatched. For a moment, silence filled the room. Alice lowered her gaze. It looked as though she was gathering the courage to say something important. When she finally spoke, her voice was noticeably softer than before. Alice admitted that there was something she wanted to ask him. Jack immediately asked what it was. Then he encouraged her not to be shy. From his perspective, they had finally arrived at the main course. Everything up until now had merely been the appetizer. Then she revealed the request she had been holding back all this time. She said that she wanted to destroy the world. After a brief pause, she looked directly at Jack. Then, in a calm and sincere voice, she asked if he would be kind enough to lend her a helping hand. Jack initially took Alice's declaration lightly. For a moment, he wondered if he had misheard her. So he told her to hold on and asked her to repeat her wish one more time, just to make sure he had heard it correctly. Alice did exactly that. She calmly stated that she wanted to destroy the world. And to accomplish that goal, she needed Jack to lend her his strength. Jack immediately focused on that particular part of her statement. Lend her his strength. That sounded like a much bigger request than she was making it seem. Before giving any sort of answer, he asked her to explain the details behind her wish. Alice agreed. Rather than jumping straight into the explanation, she suggested discussing it over tea. Later, as the two sat together with cups in hand, Alice began her story. Long ago, there existed a certain dark mage. She was a woman with an incredibly ambitious goal. Unfortunately, time claimed her life before she could ever achieve it. The dark mage despised the limitations imposed upon mortals. As a result, she created a forbidden technique. It was a spell capable of passing knowledge and power to one's next life. A technique that outright rejected the idea that death was the absolute end. To the dark mage, death was not a conclusion. It was merely a milestone. Hearing the story, Jack could not help but be impressed. He remarked that it sounded awesome. In his eyes, the dark mage's ambition was so absurdly large that she had willingly thrown herself into all sorts of forbidden and dangerous territory. Someone that obsessed had to be completely unhinged. At this point, he assumed the woman had probably transformed herself into some sort of monster. Alice shook her head. The truth was the exact opposite. The dark mage had been stubbornly committed to remaining human. She could have pursued immortality and lived forever if she wanted to. The means had existed. Yet she rejected that path entirely. Her goal was never to achieve greatness as an immortal being. She wanted to accomplish everything as a human. The mention of immortality immediately caught Jack's attention. Following the flow of the story, he decided to make a guess. After connecting the pieces together, he arrived at a conclusion. Alice was the reincarnation of that dark mage. Alice confirmed that he was correct. However, she quickly added an important clarification. She was the dark mage's next life, but she was not actually the dark mage herself. Although she had inherited the woman's power, knowledge, and will, her mind was entirely her own. Mentally speaking, Alice was a completely different person. Jack considered that explanation for a moment. Then he asked whether that meant the dark mage was effectively dead from an ego perspective. Alice immediately agreed. Exactly. She explained that the dark mage had recognized her own mediocrity. More importantly, she feared that preserving the same ego forever would eventually prevent further growth. That was why she never intended to keep herself alive indefinitely. The dark mage believed that spontaneous and unpredictable growth was the true catalyst for evolution. For that reason, the very first dark mage chose to live, die, and be reborn repeatedly, accumulating countless experiences across multiple lifetimes. Alice then revealed how far the process had progressed. She was the 13th life. Alchemy techniques had been inherited from the second life. Golem magic came from the 6th. Magical tool craftsmanship originated from the 9th. And spiritual perception had been acquired during the 13th. As Jack listened, he quickly understood the implications. With every new life, Alice became stronger. Every reincarnation expanded the foundation laid by the previous one. The amount of patience and determination required for a plan like that was difficult to comprehend. And after all those generations of preparation, her ultimate goal was still the same: to destroy the world. Alice immediately dismissed his praise. She claimed that she was not a genius. Everything she possessed had simply been handed down from one life to the next. Then she told him to ignore that topic entirely. What mattered was her goal. Firmly and without hesitation, Alice declared once again that she wanted to destroy the world. The reason, according to her, was simple. She wanted to become the greatest alchemist to ever exist. Jack stared at her in confusion. He failed to see the connection. What did destroying the world have to do with becoming the greatest alchemist? Alice proceeded to explain. From the perspective of the original Dark Mage, world domination represented the ultimate achievement. No one had ever accomplished it before. Therefore, if she could achieve such a feat, she would deserve to be recognized as the ultimate existence. There was another reason as well. Once the world lay in ruins, no new generations would be born. No future genius would ever appear to surpass her accomplishments. For countless ages, centuries, millennia, and eons, there would be no rival. Alice alone would remain the greatest. After explaining the logic, she noted that this was the line of thinking held by the first Dark Mage. Jack sat quietly for a moment. Then he nodded. At last, he understood. Now he finally grasped Alice's story and the origin of the ambition she carried within her. Jack remarked that Alice truly was one of the mad scientists. He had already noticed from the beginning that she wasn't a normal child. However, it turned out that she was a far more dangerous monster than he had initially imagined. At those words, Alice fell silent. A trace of sadness crossed her face as she quietly called herself disgusting. Yet Jack immediately disagreed. Instead, he told her that what he saw was an unwavering determination toward her goal, and that was something he found genuinely admirable. He made it clear that he wasn't joking. He truly respected her. As far as Jack was concerned, there was nothing inherently evil about pushing forward at the expense of others. After all, if someone beat a person down on the road, the one left standing would often be branded the villain. Yet from another perspective, if that same person removed every obstacle in their path and ultimately achieved their dream, they could just as easily be praised as the most righteous individual alive. It didn't matter where one stood. That was simply how the world worked. The strong consumed the weak, and only the strong were free to walk their own path. Alice thanked him for those words. She admitted that she was genuinely glad to hear them. It wasn't every day that someone actually understood her. Then, as she rose from her seat, Alice began explaining what she could offer. She possessed a vast amount of knowledge and talent. She could prepare bomb-making equipment and had some understanding of magic as well. In her eyes, those skills would make her useful to Jack. More importantly, she promised that she would help him return to his own world. And that, she explained, was exactly why she needed his help in destroying this one. Hearing that, Jack asked if she was essentially telling him to plant a bomb powerful enough to blow up the entire world. Alice answered without hesitation. That was exactly what she wanted. She went on to explain that Jack's bomb-making abilities were a crucial piece of her plan. To her, Jack represented an opportunity she simply couldn't afford to let slip away. Referring to the power he had used to destroy the imperial capital, she asked if he would be willing to lend that strength to her. As she spoke, she extended her hand toward him. For a brief moment, Jack paused to think it over. Then he finally spoke. Destroying the world was certainly outside his usual pay grade, but it was undeniably interesting. Besides, having a local guide him through this world would be invaluable. With a grin, he admitted that he was looking forward to it. Reaching out, he took Alice's hand, and the two shook on their agreement. Jack told her that he was glad to be working alongside someone like her. If nothing else, his life in this world was guaranteed to be interesting. Alice responded that she was glad as well. From that moment onward, she said, they would help each other. Jack nodded in agreement and suggested that they get started on achieving their respective goals. As far as Jack was concerned, the only thing that truly mattered was finding a way back home. Whatever happened along the way, happened. Alice might have been a lunatic, but she was a genius lunatic. Her objective didn't interfere with his own, and deep down, Jack had a feeling this partnership was going to be entertaining. Thus, the world's craziest duo was born. Later, preparations for war began in earnest. Jack asked Alice if he could use the mixing room. He admitted that he would feel much safer with a weapon in his hands. Whether it was for Alice's goal or his own, having a means to fight back was absolutely necessary. Alice agreed without hesitation. She told him to use the room and all the materials available as he pleased. According to her, she had already carefully examined Jack's abilities. At this point, what remained was figuring out the actual method of bringing about the world's destruction. She informed him that she would be downstairs. If he needed anything, all he had to do was call for her. As Alice left, Jack quietly reflected on her words. So she was already hard at work searching for a way to destroy the world. How diligent. More importantly, however, he needed to keep a close eye on her. After all, Jack's priority was escaping this world before Alice managed to destroy it. If she ever discovered a method that didn't require his bombs, he had little doubt she would betray him without a second thought. She had already thrown away 13 lives in pursuit of this goal. The sheer persistence she possessed was honestly terrifying. Compared to someone like Alice, Jack felt like nothing more than a cute little bomber. With that thought in mind, he placed his empty handgun and broken knife on the work table. The sight left him feeling slightly uneasy. When he had been transported to this world, he had left his weapon bag behind. Most of his ammunition had been stored inside it. Still, there was no point crying over spilled milk. Jack preferred to look on the bright side. Compared to some of the situations he had experienced before, this wasn't even close to the worst outcome. Being thrown out into a snowstorm with nothing but his underwear had been far more miserable. That had been truly horrible. Using that as his standard, life here was actually pretty comfortable. He had clothes. He had food. He had a roof over his head. Most importantly, he had access to a bomb-making room. On top of that, thanks to bomb-making EX++, even when dealing with strange materials from an entirely different world, success was almost guaranteed as long as Jack was the one doing the crafting. After some experimentation, he successfully assembled a makeshift tear gas bomb. The quality naturally depended on the materials and manufacturing process. However, creating a functioning explosive was never the issue. Success itself was guaranteed. Besides, he was still learning the properties of countless unfamiliar materials. Time passed as he immersed himself in his work. Eventually, Jack leaned back and stretched his body. By that point, he had already crafted 30 different types of explosives in a single session. It wasn't much by his standards. Still, it was honest work. As he looked over his creations, another idea crossed his mind. He wanted to try making a magic bomb. If he was going to face enemies from both this world and his original one, incorporating magic into his arsenal would be a tremendous advantage. He had previously worked with a mage to upgrade the city core. This time, perhaps he could convince Alice to share some of her magical knowledge and combine it with his expertise in explosives. With that thought, Jack headed downstairs in search of her. However, the moment he glanced through a window, he froze. His entire body went still. Outside the mansion stood an army. The sight left him completely stunned. Not understanding what was happening, Jack immediately turned toward Alice and asked if she had sent out invitations. Alice calmly replied that the army was coming. Jack asked what exactly she knew about the situation. Alice shrugged and stated that she was a law-abiding citizen who paid her taxes on time. There had certainly been rumors circulating recently, but as far as the authorities were concerned, she was merely an artisan. Therefore, if she had to guess, the soldiers were probably there for Jack. Jack immediately groaned. Oh, come on. He pointed out that he was an honest, God-fearing man. Surely he deserved a break every once in a while. Unfortunately, the army outside seemed to disagree. A booming voice suddenly echoed across the area. The general leading the force issued a warning to the bomber hiding inside the mansion. He ordered Jack to surrender immediately. Then he repeated the demand. Jack was to surrender himself at once. Otherwise, if he chose to resist, his life would be forfeit. Alice glanced toward Jack. In response, Jack forced a fake smile onto his face. Then he quietly turned toward the stairs. His intention was simple. He would head back upstairs, grab some of the explosives he had just finished making, and prepare for what came next. His decision was made. The moment the general threatened his life, Jack's patience vanished. Frankly, he felt that he should have been the one making threats. Without another word, he rushed toward the entrance, ready to charge outside. However, before he could make it far, Alice grabbed hold of him and stopped him in his tracks. She told him to calm down. After all, wiping out an entire army would take time. Instead, Alice suggested that they leave immediately. Jack, however, wasn't convinced. Even if they escaped today, there was no guarantee the army would simply give up. There was every chance they would continue pursuing them. If there was no better way to carve out a path forward, then he would simply have to kill every last one of them. Fortunately, Alice seemed to have another idea. She mentioned transportation and instructed Jack to follow her. A short while later, they arrived in front of a heavily secured door. As they stood there, Alice informed him that this would be the first time she had ever shown this room to anyone. Then she opened the door. The interior was completely engulfed in darkness. Jack immediately commented on it. No wonder nobody had seen what was inside. The room was so dark that it was impossible to make out anything. Then, suddenly, something illuminated the space. A series of lights flickered to life. What emerged from the darkness left Jack stunned. There was a car inside. For a moment he simply stared at it. Then he asked what exactly he was looking at. Alice explained that it was a special vehicle created through the combination of 10 golems. In every practical sense, it was superior to a horse. She went on to explain that she had built it in preparation for the day she would eventually leave on a journey. It seemed, however, that the day had arrived far sooner than she had expected. A wide grin immediately spread across Jack's face. Perfect. That was the only word he could think of. At that moment, he couldn't have been happier to be working alongside a genius like Alice. Alice quickly dismissed the compliment. According to her, she wasn't a genius at all. She was merely a successor carrying on the work of others. Jack wasn't having any of that. He immediately told her to stop with the humility. As far as he was concerned, Alice was incredible. For a brief moment, Alice simply stared at him, quietly taking in his words. Meanwhile, Jack continued admiring the vehicle. The craftsmanship was remarkable. The sleek design, the mechanical precision, and the sheer ingenuity behind its construction all stood out immediately. Then Alice suddenly spoke. She told him that he was a good man. Naturally, Jack accepted the compliment without even a hint of modesty. He replied that he already knew that. In fact, he considered himself especially good with women. Once that important matter was settled, Jack clapped his hands together and announced that it was time to pack Alice's belongings. Everything needed to be loaded onto the vehicle. After all, if they were going to make their grand escape, they might as well do it in style. He couldn't help but grin. What was the point of having an amazing ride if nobody got to see it? Surely they owed those soldiers a proper reaction. Outside the mansion, chaos was already spreading through the army's ranks. Several soldiers had fallen victim to hidden traps. Others were suddenly struck by bursts of static electricity. The formation was rapidly deteriorating. Watching his troops stumble about, the general exploded in anger. He berated his soldiers and called them idiots. How was it possible that they couldn't even secure a single mansion? In his eyes, this was supposed to be nothing more than the residence of an alchemist. One of the soldiers immediately objected. Nothing more? This wasn't just an alchemist's house. This place was practically a witch's hut. Another soldier couldn't believe that Jack had chosen to hide here of all places. Unfortunately for them, things were about to get much worse. A deep rumble suddenly echoed beneath the ground. The earth itself began to shake. The soldiers froze. Then the ground erupted. Massive golems emerged from beneath the surface and immediately charged into the army's ranks. Panic spread instantly. The giant constructs tore through the formation, crushing the soldiers' lines and throwing the battlefield into complete disorder. Meanwhile, from inside the mansion, Jack and Alice could hear the general's furious voice echoing across the battlefield. In frustration, he screamed at his men to destroy the golems. Jack let out an amused chuckle. Those golems were certainly useful. Alice agreed, but she pointed out that the army's numbers were overwhelming. In her estimation, the golems wouldn't be able to hold them back for very long. Then she handed Jack the key to the vehicle. Without wasting any time, the two climbed inside. The moment Jack started the engine, his eyes lit up. The sound was perfect. It was everything he loved. Alice glanced at him and asked whether he was certain about not using the autopilot function. Jack immediately dismissed the idea. He didn't need autopilot. He trusted his own driving skills. Besides, he wanted Alice to watch closely as he smashed his way through the crowd waiting outside. Alice hesitated for a moment. She admitted that it was difficult to describe what she was feeling. It wasn't fear. Before she could finish, Jack cut in. Of course she was nervous. This was a car date after all. Truthfully, he was nervous too. Alice simply stared at him for a moment before deciding not to argue. Instead, she informed him that she would be opening the wall directly ahead of them. She told him to get ready. Jack nodded. Then Alice began chanting. A magical incantation flowed from her lips as her hands started to glow with light. Outside the mansion, the soldiers watched in confusion. The wall in front of the building slowly split apart, revealing a path forward. None of them had expected that. Inside the vehicle, Jack grinned from ear to ear. Our fun drive begins. His excitement was impossible to hide. Let's get this show on the road. Then he glanced toward Alice. And be careful not to bite your tongue. Alice quietly braced herself. The next moment, the vehicle shot forward. It burst through the opening in the wall and launched into the air. Then it came crashing down into the ranks of soldiers below. The impact sent the formation into complete chaos. Jack couldn't help but laugh. Honestly, he had been worried about the lack of seatbelts and airbags. Fortunately, there had been plenty of cushioning underneath. Alice looked at him with complete confusion. She had absolutely no idea what seatbelts or airbags were supposed to be. Meanwhile, Jack showed no intention of slowing down. Any soldiers standing in their path were simply obstacles to be driven through. His objective was straightforward. They would blast their way out of the city and worry about everything else later. However, one final obstacle remained. Ahead stood the general, accompanied by a group of soldiers. The officer stepped forward and ordered the vehicle to halt. He demanded that Jack stop immediately. The general then accused him of destroying the imperial capital and declared that punishment was unavoidable. Jack's response was simple. He told the man to shut up. The vehicle never slowed. The general had only moments to react before the speeding machine reached him. The collision sent him flying aside as the vehicle continued forward without hesitation. The windshield was quickly stained, obscuring part of their view. Alice pointed out that their vision had become blocked. Jack immediately switched on the wipers. Unfortunately, that only helped so much. The windshield remained partially obscured. Even so, he continued driving. Behind them, the remaining soldiers scrambled into action. Several shouted for their comrades not to let the fugitives escape. Others began giving chase. Jack wasn't particularly concerned. As far as he was concerned, he could still see the road well enough. If anything, he jokingly considered the mess on the windshield a form of decoration. Alice quietly took note of the issue. She decided that future improvements to the vehicle would definitely be necessary. And so, leaving chaos behind them, the two finally departed from the city. The road ahead was uncertain, but their journey had officially begun. One of the soldiers immediately ordered the others to contact the remaining troops. Another shouted for the mages to focus their attacks on the vehicle's wheels. Yet no matter what they tried, nothing seemed to make a difference. Jack laughed so hard that he could barely contain himself. He declared that the car was an absolutely wonderful monster of a machine. Neither bullets nor magic could hold a candle to her. Alice pointed out that the vehicle was not completely impenetrable. However, its armor was constructed from 10 golems, each one as solid and durable as a wall. In addition, the entire frame was coated with a powerful magic resistance enchantment. To Jack, that was incredibly cool. Then Alice suddenly remembered something. Almost immediately, she activated a music player. A loud and powerful song burst through the speakers, perfectly suited for a road trip like this. Jack recognized it at once. It was hard rock. Jack remarked that he had not expected Alice to have a music player installed. In response, Alice explained that it was a special form of magic that used melodies as formulas. According to her, the fifth hero had been a musician and must have greatly enjoyed this genre. Although she personally was not much of a fan, she admitted that its benefits were difficult to ignore. The song enhanced dynamic vision and encouraged excitement among listeners. Furthermore, records had shown that it was highly effective at boosting team morale. Jack nodded in understanding. Then he looked around and could not help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Medieval scenery, guns, magic, golem-powered cars, and now hard rock music. At that point, he honestly wondered what this world did not have. Meanwhile, Alice glanced through one of the windows. Almost immediately, she spotted pursuers closing in on them. Several men were riding motorcycles as they rapidly gained ground. The riders were armed as well. Jack pointed out that they intended to drive and shoot at the same time. He had to admit that those guys definitely knew how to play the game. Even so, there was no way he was going to let them have their way. Without hesitation, Jack pulled out one of his explosives and handed it to Alice. He instructed her to light it. Once it was ready, he tossed it out of the vehicle. The bomb was not designed to inflict direct damage. Instead, its sole purpose was to create an enormous cloud of smoke. However, that smoke contained several powerful stimulants similar to those found in chili peppers. As a result, it was extremely effective at blinding and immobilizing enemies. The pursuing riders quickly found themselves engulfed by the cloud. Most of them immediately suffered the effects. Watching their struggles, Jack laughed and confidently declared that none of them would be recovering from that anytime soon. However, one rider managed to push through the smoke. Emerging from the cloud, the man shouted for Jack to stop and immediately opened fire on the vehicle. Jack responded by slamming the car directly into the pursuing rider. As the motorcycle was swept aside, he came to a realization. If they kept dealing with pursuers like this, they would be stuck all day. It was time to find a way out of the city. Alice informed him that the nearest exit was located on the opposite side of the city. What? Jack exclaimed in surprise. Now that was a problem. There was no time to turn around. As far as Jack was concerned, their best option was to keep pressing the accelerator and look for smaller routes along the way. Then Alice suddenly placed both hands against the vehicle's surface. Moments later, the upper half of the car lifted into the air and spun around. Jack had absolutely no idea what was happening. The entire event was so sudden that he could only stare in confusion. When everything finally settled back into place, the vehicle appeared completely normal again. Jack immediately asked Alice what exactly she had done. Alice calmly explained that she had ordered the golem to rotate its upper body. According to her, spinning only that section was much easier than turning the entire vehicle around. Then she simply told Jack to drive straight ahead. Jack stared at her with a thoroughly confused expression. Finally, he told Alice that she should at least give him some warning next time. Surprises like that were not exactly his thing. A slight smile appeared on Alice's face. She admitted that she was finding the trip surprisingly thrilling. Jack glanced at her and said that he was glad she was getting something out of all this. From Jack's perspective, the entire situation was ethically messed up. Personally, though, he could not bring himself to care all that much. After a brief silence, Alice asked whether he liked the car. Jack answered with immediate enthusiasm. He absolutely loved it. In fact, he joked that in his next letter to Santa Claus, he would wish for a way to bring the vehicle back to his old world. Alice was pleased to hear that. She then admitted that she believed the car still had room for improvement. Because of that, she asked Jack to give her detailed suggestions later. Naturally, Jack agreed. The very idea excited him. He could hardly imagine what the vehicle would become after receiving upgrades. Not long afterward, a barricade came into view. A line of soldiers waited behind it. Armed and prepared, they stood ready to fire the moment the vehicle entered range. Jack quickly sized up the obstacle ahead. The barricade was poorly constructed. In his opinion, it would not be capable of stopping much of anything. Almost immediately, he decided that they would simply ram straight through it. He told Alice to hold on tight. However, Alice calmly told him to leave it to her. Once again, she placed her hands against the surface of the vehicle. Jack immediately asked what she intended to do. Alice replied that she was going to reshape the car into the perfect form for breaking through obstacles. As she cast the spell, the vehicle's engine let out a powerful roar. Jack waited for something to happen. For a few moments, nothing seemed to change. Then the transformation began. The vehicle evolved into something far more intimidating. A massive spear-shaped structure emerged from the front of the car, forming a deadly point designed for impact. Jack's eyes lit up at the sight. He was genuinely excited. The car looked far scarier now. Alice then asked whether the design seemed more suitable for ramming through flesh. Jack immediately agreed. According to him, this was exactly the kind of improvement he had been talking about. As far as he was concerned, it was an excellent choice. With that, he pushed the vehicle to even greater speeds. The barricade rapidly grew closer. The soldiers opened fire the moment they came within range. Bullets hammered against the approaching vehicle. Yet none of it was enough to stop the charge. Realizing the danger, the commander immediately ordered everyone to retreat and clear the path. Unfortunately for them, the warning came too late. The transformed vehicle crashed through the barricade without mercy. Soldiers were scattered as the spear-headed machine tore straight through their defenses. Amid the chaos, Jack reached out and grabbed one of the soldiers. The unfortunate man looked completely bewildered. Jack casually asked whether he was injured anywhere. The soldier stared at him in confusion. Jack then informed him that there was no need to thank him. After all, he only needed the man for a brief conversation. Turning his attention to the soldier's weapon, Jack asked whether he could have the gun. Preferably, he would like some bullets as well. He explained that at this rate, he was eventually going to run out of firepower. Desperate to survive, the soldier quickly handed over the weapon and pleaded for his life. Jack accepted it with a grin. He thanked the man and said that he owed him a big one. Then, without another word, he tossed the soldier aside and continued on his way. Jack pulled out the gun and showed it to Alice. He called it a cool souvenir. Then, with a grin, he remarked that the people in this world were incredibly kind. Their hostility had deeply touched him. Alice immediately called him a joker. In response, Jack casually stated that he was a man who had never been serious a single day in his life. Soon afterward, the city gate came into view. Alice pointed it out and announced that they had finally reached it. However, the massive gate was sealed shut. Jack glanced at it and confidently stated that breaking through it would not be a problem. Yet before they could act, another sound reached his ears. The rapid pounding of hooves echoed behind them. Jack turned his head and spotted a lone rider charging straight toward them. The distance between them was shrinking fast. He wondered if the approaching figure was a knight. Unlike the city guards they had dealt with earlier, this person radiated overwhelming killing intent. The pressure alone made it obvious that this opponent was on an entirely different level. Jack admitted that this one looked like a difficult fight. Alice quickly identified the pursuer. She explained that the rider was the captain of the knights stationed in the city. She was about to introduce the knight by name, but Jack immediately cut her off. He told her there was no need for any exposition. Confused, Alice asked why. In response, Jack casually produced 3 explosives. Then he pointed out that there was no reason to remember someone's name when that person would supposedly be 6 feet under within 5 minutes. Without hesitation, he hurled the first explosive directly at the charging knight. The explosion erupted in the knight's path. However, the rider slipped through it with incredible skill and continued forward. Jack immediately followed up by throwing the remaining 2 explosives. Yet once again, the knight navigated through the blasts without slowing down. Not even the chain of explosions managed to halt her advance. Jack could not help but feel impressed. He jokingly remarked that she was better suited to be a jockey than a knight. However, his attention soon shifted to the creature beneath her. The mount looked far stranger than an ordinary horse. Alice explained that the beast was actually a monster. According to her, its distant relatives were dragons. It possessed strength and speed far beyond that of normal horses. More importantly, she warned that even with the car, escaping from it would be nearly impossible. Hearing that, Jack pointed out that Alice herself had built the vehicle. He then asked whether she felt disappointed by that fact. Alice admitted that she felt a little disappointed. Meanwhile, the knight continued closing the distance. Before long, she had reached the car itself. Their eyes met briefly. Jack greeted her with complete casualness and even asked whether she wanted to go on a tour together. The knight was visibly irritated by his attitude. She ordered him to stop yammering. Then she declared that he would die 1,000 times for his sins. The destruction he had caused was unforgivable in her eyes. No matter what happened, she had no intention of showing him mercy. The moment she finished speaking, she drew her sword and swung it downward. The strike carried immense power. The blade sliced directly through the roof of the moving car as if it were paper. However, before it could reach him, Jack caught the sword with his bare hand. Feeling the weapon's edge, Jack immediately realized that it was no ordinary blade. Alice recognized it as well. She informed him that the weapon was an enchanted sword. Its destructive power far surpassed that of conventional weapons. Because of that, she warned him to be careful. The knight attempted to pull her sword back. However, Jack refused to let go. His grip remained firm. Since she would not release the weapon, Jack decided to force her off the vehicle instead. He abruptly steered the car toward a nearby wall and slammed into it. Even then, the knight refused to relinquish her hold on the sword. She maintained her grip throughout the impact. However, while she endured the collision, her monstrous mount was not nearly as fortunate. The creature suffered severe injuries from the crash. The knight began chanting an incantation. Almost immediately, her sword started to glow with intense heat. The blade sizzled as the temperature rapidly climbed. The moment Jack felt the scorching heat through his grip, he was forced to let go. Using the head of her monster as a foothold, the knight kicked off and launched herself into the air. As she retreated, Jack called out to her. He pointed out how heartless it was to use her own monster's tracks to conceal her escape route. Meanwhile, the knight landed on the roof of the car. She was clearly irritated by Jack's constant remarks. Without hesitation, she drove her sword straight through the roof. The blade pierced downward with tremendous force. Jack narrowly avoided being struck. At that moment, Jack realized the vehicle wouldn't be able to withstand much more damage. Then Alice called out to him in concern. However, Jack calmly reassured her. He told her everything was fine and that she didn't need to worry. Afterward, he drew his sword and immediately fired upward at the knight standing on top of the car. One attack after another shot toward her position. Yet despite the barrage, not a single strike managed to connect. The knight avoided every attack without taking a single hit. Jack clicked his tongue in frustration. While continuing to drive, he remarked that a submachine gun would have made this situation considerably more manageable. Meanwhile, the city gate rapidly approached. The vehicle never slowed down. Instead, it crashed directly into the closed gate. Wood and metal exploded outward as the reinforced cars smashed through the obstacle and burst out of the city. Even after that, Jack quickly realized something. The knight was still on top of the vehicle. He immediately told Alice to switch the car to autopilot. Alice agreed without hesitation. With the vehicle now driving itself, Jack pulled out his knife. Then he climbed out of the car. Jack leaped onto the roof and landed opposite the knight. Upon seeing her, he casually greeted her. Then he informed her that she was freeloading, creating unnecessary trouble, and generally being a massive hassle. Therefore, he politely requested that she get off the car immediately. The knight's expression darkened. She declared that Jack should regret ever showing his face in this place. According to her, once someone stepped within her range, there would be no escape. Without another word, she made the first move. Her sword flashed toward him. However, Jack reacted instantly. He caught the hand holding the sword before the attack could fully connect. Then he leaned closer. The two stared directly into each other's eyes. Before the knight could react, Jack drove his knife into her leg. The blade sank deep into the wound. He deliberately left it there. Then he pulled a pin from the knife's handle. A grin spread across his face. According to Jack, the match was already over. As the knight desperately tried to pull the knife free from her leg, Jack calmly informed her that she had just received an express ticket to the other side. Then he struck. With all his strength, Jack kicked her. The impact launched the knight high into the air. Even while flying upward, she still managed to shout. Outraged, she demanded to know how Jack dared to lay a foot on her. Meanwhile, Jack simply began counting down. The knight was still airborne when the answer arrived. A violent explosion erupted around her. The blast engulfed her completely. Fragments of fire and smoke scattered across the sky. Jack watched the explosion unfold overhead. To him, it was actually quite a nice sight. The weapon had been a bomb disguised as a dagger. Explosives had been packed directly into the hilt. It was still only a prototype, but the performance had been respectable. Considering the results, Jack figured he might as well manufacture a few extras in the future. As the smoke slowly faded from the sky, something beside him caught his attention. The knight's sword remained behind. Apparently, the weapon had survived its owner. Later, inside the car, Jack announced that he was back. Better yet, he had managed to bring back some loot. With a grin, he presented the sword to Alice. In response, Alice congratulated him on returning safely. Jack readily agreed. According to him, it had been a complete victory. Then he raised his hand toward Alice, expecting a high five. However, Alice flinched at the unfamiliar gesture. Confused, she asked what exactly he was doing. Jack explained that it was called a high five. At the same time, he wondered whether she truly had never seen one before. Alice replied that it was the first time she had ever heard of such a thing. Curious, she then asked what kind of situation called for using it. Jack admitted that there was no clear definition. Still, he explained that people often used it when they were happy and wanted to share that feeling with someone else, or when they wanted to hype another person up. If he had to put it into words, he said, it was all about the vibe. Alice nodded and said that she understood. Mentally, she made note of it. Then she raised her own hand and smiled. After being left hanging for a moment, she tilted her head slightly and asked if Jack was not going to high-five her after all. Jack hesitated briefly. Then, with a laugh, he gladly agreed. Their hands met in a clean high-five. As the car continued down the road, Jack suddenly admitted that he really missed wine and cigarettes. Alice responded that they could get both once they reached a town. Until then, she told him to be patient. Jack could only hope they would come across one sooner rather than later. A little later, Jack asked whether they needed to refuel the car. Alice explained that there was no need. The golem had been designed to absorb magical power directly from the atmosphere. As long as they were simply traveling around with it, running out of fuel should not be a concern. Jack remarked that it sounded incredibly convenient. If only technology like that had existed back in his own world. Meanwhile, Alice's attention shifted toward the damaged roof of the vehicle. She pointed out that they could not keep traveling in its current condition. To repair it, and possibly upgrade it as well, she would need to acquire some or materials. Hearing that, Jack asked whether she had already decided on their next destination. Alice replied that she had considered several possibilities, but the independent nation of Urea seemed like the best choice. Alice went on to explain that Urea was a cluster of cities located throughout the empire's hilly southern region. What made it unusual was its self-governing structure. For representatives each ruled over their own territory, creating a system unlike anywhere else in the empire. Jack chuckled at the word, unusual. In his experience, places described that way were rarely peaceful. He remarked that an independent nation like that probably came with its fair share of problems. Alice admitted that he was correct. Urea was home to countless criminal organizations, and its security situation was notoriously poor. Hearing that, Jack nodded and said he had already figured as much. However, Alice pointed out that there was another side to it. Since there were no official records of entries or exits, people could move around freely. There were no formal knights or soldiers either. In her opinion, it sounded like the perfect place for people like them to keep a low profile. Jack understood her reasoning immediately and agreed. Quietly, he reflected on their current circumstances. Considering the situation they were in, moving through an outlaw town would probably be much easier than trying to blend into a lawful one. As an additional point, Alice mentioned that Urea's economy appeared to be doing surprisingly well. Compared to other regions, tariffs were relatively low, and trade activity remained strong. With any luck, they might even be able to find the repair materials needed for the car there. Jack agreed without hesitation. In that case, he said, Urea should be their destination. Alice explained that reaching Urea from their current location would normally take around 10 days. However, if they cut straight through the danger zone, they could reduce the journey to only 5. She went on to explain that the danger zone was home to powerful monsters. Under normal circumstances, it was a route that only someone with a death wish would even consider taking. Even so, she believed they could afford to use that path this time. To Jack, that sounded incredibly bold. He started to ask whether there was a particular reason for that decision. Before he could finish his question, Alice raised 3 fingers. The gesture only confused him further. Alice explained that there were 3 reasons. First, now that Jack was with her, crossing the danger zone would not be a problem. As an example, she pointed out that even renowned heroes rarely reached a level comparable to his. To put things into perspective, she explained that the Knight Commander Jack had blown up was around level 70. Meanwhile, even reaching level 40 was considered impressive for an ordinary soldier. According to Alice, Jack's abilities were completely off the charts. Hearing that, Jack looked genuinely surprised and asked if the gap was really that significant. Alice assured him that it was. Then she moved on to the second reason. She wanted to level up while traveling through the danger zone. Defeating powerful monsters would increase their levels accordingly, strengthening their physical abilities while also expanding their mana pools. With Jack fighting alongside her, she believed they could safely hunt monsters that would normally be far beyond her capabilities. In Alice's opinion, that kind of growth would prove useful in the future. After considering it, Jack nodded and admitted that she had a point. Alice then revealed the third reason for taking the dangerous route. Monster remains could be used as valuable bomb-making materials. That immediately caught Jack's attention. To him, that sounded extremely interesting. Alice explained that monster remains had a surprisingly wide range of applications. Most people used them for crafting weapons, but they also functioned exceptionally well as bomb materials. Some monsters possessed blood with explosive properties. When packed inside hardened carapace fragments, Those materials could even penetrate heavily armored targets. Jack quickly understood the potential. Because of their high affinity with magic, Alice could also imbue those materials with spells, making them even more versatile. He remarked that, as expected of an alchemist, she really knew her field. Alice quietly appreciated the compliment. Meanwhile, Jack found himself studying her for a moment. Initially, he had assumed Alice was the quiet and reserved type. Yet whenever the conversation shifted toward alchemy, she became surprisingly talkative. In his eyes, she was far more expressive than he had first believed. Noticing his gaze, Alice looked back and asked if something was wrong. Then she added that if he objected to the plan, they could always take the longer route instead. Jack immediately shook his head. Naturally, they would take the shortest path. After all, nothing but benefits seemed to come from it. Not long afterward, Jack noticed several trucks approaching from behind. Both of them quickly realized they were likely being pursued from the city. Jack let out a sigh and remarked that their pursuers were certainly persistent. Then he commented that it would be nice if they had something useful to work with. In response, Alice handed him a gun. She casually informed him that the weapon was already loaded. Jack thanked her. At the same time, he couldn't help but think that she was remarkably considerate. Stepping out of the car, Jack told Alice that additional damage to the vehicle would be a nuisance. For that reason, he asked her to sit tight for a little while. Alice agreed without hesitation. With that settled, Jack began walking toward the pursuing soldiers. His stride was calm and confident. The atmosphere around him almost resembled that of a villain making his entrance. Seeing him approach, the soldiers immediately readied themselves for battle. A barrage of gunfire erupted moments later. The soldiers fired relentlessly, filling the air with bullets. Yet Jack weaved through the attacks effortlessly. Every movement appeared casual, almost lazy. Watching the rounds miss him entirely, he found himself wondering what exactly they had been aiming at. He even remarked that soldiers from another world seemed to be slacking off on their training. Deciding to show them how it was really done, Jack calmly raised his own gun and took aim.